And our first speaker today is David Watamull, and I met him many years ago when he first started Cardax, and also his colleague in this endeavor, Dr. Brad Wilcox, spoke in the very first mini medical school in 2014 about longevity. Now, David is definitely an impressive entrepreneur, and I really like the fact that this has all been accomplished here in Hawaii. I also thought we would benefit from learning more about anti-inflammatories, since inflammation is increasingly credited with having a strong role in many diseases. Please welcome David.
Thank you very much, Virginia. I'm always delighted to be here at this wonderful facility. It brings back a lot of memories for me. I remember 51 years ago, senior in high school, cutting math class to go to Point Panic, probably the best surfing day I ever had in my life, actually, since then. Little did I know that 30 years later, I'd be walking on this particular piece of property with one of my heroes, Ed Cadman. Ed was the visionary, the first dean of this particular facility, and a champion of the concept that Hawaii could be a place for cutting-edge medical research. And so when I'm here today and I walked over here today, I always think of Ed. And yeah, indeed. And so we arrived today, as Virginia mentioned here, with something that's very transformative has been happening in the medical community over the last 5 or 10 years of time, particularly in the last year or two. And that's physicians, research scientists, they all agree that the key to health and longevity is inflammatory health. So what do we mean by that? It's related to how inflammation plays into your overall health itself. Inflammation itself is a normal process. It's a vital part of the immune system. Response to injury and infection. It's a signal for the immune system to heal and repair damaged tissue and defend itself against foreign invaders like viruses and bacteria. But there are two types of inflammation, acute and chronic. We're all familiar with acute. This is what happens when you cut yourself or you get a cold or something. You get redness, warmth, and swelling and pain due to the infection, irritation, or injury. And without this acute inflammation response, wounds would fester and infections become deadly. But chronic inflammation is different, and this is the breakthrough. It's prolonged, or in places where it's not supposed to be, this chronic inflammation. It's linked to certain diseases, such as heart disease or stroke, and in many cases leads to autoimmune disorders, such as rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. What causes this chronic low-grade inflammation? Things like viruses, pollution, obesity, poor diet, excessive alcohol consumption, autoimmune disorders, smoking, chronic stress, untreated causes of acute inflammation such as infection or injury. It is a complicated process. Take notes real quickly. There'll be a test in five minutes on this. And we show this not because of that test, but to show that the medical and scientific community now understands how this process works. And there are a couple things that can simplify this process. We can now measure inflammation through blood tests. We measure things called cytokines. These are molecular messengers between cells and inside cells that regulate various inflammatory responses. Two very important ones, and there are a number of them, is something called a cytokine called IL-1 or interleukin-1, and TNF-alpha or tumor necrosis factor alpha. And they're important in rheumatoid arthritis and tissue destruction. But very importantly, too, there's another one called C-reactive protein or CRP. High levels are seen in inflammatory diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and heart disease in particular. And inflammation, this chronic low-grade inflammation, we now know helps promote the growth of plaques, loosen plaque in arteries, and triggers blood clots. the primary cause of heart attacks and strokes. Let me give you a couple examples of what has really been the driving catalysts of this change and understanding in the scientific community. What we really need to see in the scientific community are large human clinical trials to feel very confident that we have accurately described the scientific phenomena underlying the diseases. And here's an important one. This is a 10,061 patient CANTOS trial. CANTOS is an acronym. I won't bore you with it. It was sponsored by Novartis, and it showed that if you could reduce inflammation, you could reduce cardiovascular events such as heart attacks and strokes in particular. So what this trial was really designed to do was to validate the inflammatory hypothesis by targeting inflammation to reduce cardiovascular risk. So this was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. As I said, 10,061 cardiovascular patients in 39 countries. Importantly, they're all on standard of care. Statins, blood pressure medication, blood thinning medications, whatever else the physicians thought were necessary. They also had to have elevated inflammation above 2 milligrams per liter. That's a test that actually your doctor can measure today. And they used a drug called canakinumab that targets IL-1, that cytokine that I talked about earlier. It's a 4-year trial, long-term trial. Importantly, there were no change in lipids, so no decrease in the bad cholesterol or elevation of the good cholesterol. So this was the first time you could actually scientifically test this one hypothesis that inflammation reduction alone can result in cardiovascular benefit. And what they saw was that heart attacks and strokes decreased by 25%, cardiovascular death by 31%, and all-cause mortality also by 31%. And again, these are in patients who are on all the best care that the medical community can offer today. So this was a major breakthrough. Dr. Steve Nissen, the head of cardiovascular medicine at Cleveland Clinic, probably the most famous cardiovascular clinic in the world, said about the CANTOS study, this study opens up an entirely new vista for the treatment of heart disease, because now everybody on the planet, in the pharmaceutical industry and in research institutions like ours and at the National Institutes of Health, are going to be looking to find anti-inflammatory therapies. So if that's true, why don't we just manage this chronic inflammation with the anti-inflammatories that are already on the market today? Why not? Why not look at things like ibuprofen, aspirin, celecoxib, Tylenol, and steroids like prednisone or prednisolone? We probably all know the answer. They have too many side effects to take on a chronic basis. Things like heart attacks, GI bleeds, strokes, liver damage, immune compromise, and more. You can take those things for a little while, but not chronically, not for an extended period of time. And so there really is no anti-inflammatory. There's been no anti-inflammatory that's safe enough for this chronic use until now, until what we're going to talk about today. And that's a compound called Astaxanthin, a safe anti-inflammatory for health and longevity. What is Astaxanthin? We all know it. We may not know we know it, but it's the naturally occurring marine carotenoid found in salmon, microalgae, krill, lobster, and crab. Carotenoids are natural pigments that impart coloration and support animal health and vitality. And they're responsible for turning salmon and shellfish pink, or their bright red color here as you see in these spawning salmon. Without astaxanthin, salmon are gray, and maybe that would be obvious. But very importantly, this was the aha moment, for me at least, about the importance of astaxanthin and the potential for it as a safe anti-inflammatory. Without astaxanthin, salmon are smaller, they have reproductive problems, they're prone to infections, and they're too weak to swim upstream. Safety, the key. No significant side effects have been reported in published studies of astaxanthin. And in fact, astaxanthin has a designation from the FDA called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. And there's been extensive safety testing that I'll show you in a minute, some of that specific. And of course, we have a long history of use. We've eaten salmon and shellfish for millennia, and there have been dietary supplements on the market with astaxanthin for almost 20 years of time. In terms of efficacy and research around astaxanthin, there are more than 1,800 peer-reviewed papers on astaxanthin. In fact, I just checked yesterday on it. There's more than 2,000. There's been an explosion of interest, research interest in astaxanthin. More than 50 of those papers we've published ourselves, coming out of Cardax here. And there have been more than 50 human clinical trials, all small, what we call pilot clinical trials. And more than 20 of those have been randomized, double-blind, and placebo-controlled, the gold standard of clinical trial design. How does it work if it doesn't have the side effects? This is a slide, by the way, that took us about 5 years and $5 million to come up with this answer here today. But astaxanthin spans mitochondrial membrane. Mitochondria in the cells, every cell in our body has mitochondria, and they're responsible for creating about 90% of the energy needed to sustain life and support healthy organ function. So astaxanthin spans this membrane. It reduces activation of inflammatory pathways by modulating oxidative stress, and you can see here it's spanning the membrane. But very importantly, it does not inhibit their normal function. Here's another look at it here as well. You can see that astaxanthin spans the membrane exactly. That's not an accident. That's why it works so well. In contrast, you look at something like vitamin E here, goes partway across the membrane, and vitamin C floats outside the membrane, and beta-carotene here actually disrupts the membrane. So we need this very highly specific design of astaxanthin to reduce the oxidative stress in the mitochondria in particular that sets off these inflammatory pathways that causes all this damage. Astaxanthin's anti-inflammatory action actually acts, and we've measured quantitatively the impact on existing anti-inflammatories. IL-1 beta, COX-2, prostaglandin E2, TNF-alpha, these are all different cytokines that we had mentioned earlier. There's quantitative evidence showing the impact of astaxanthin on these particular targets. Also, one of the major pathways that results in these particular downstream effects of inflammatory damage is something called NF-kappa B, and it works on that as well. This is one of the first studies that we saw that really convinced us that astaxanthin could be a very potent anti-inflammatory. We looked at the effect of astaxanthin on the cytokine TNF-alpha and compared it to a control where we had a huge spike in the TNF-alpha as a result of stimulation from a lipopolysaccharide that sets off inflammation in many different model systems. And as you can see here, that and compared it to a steroid, prednisolone. Steroid did a really good job of bringing down the inflammation. As we know, it's a powerful anti-inflammatory, but astaxanthin was just about as good. The difference, side effects. The difference was that you did not see the side effects of prednisone with astaxanthin. Astaxanthin has inflammatory health applications, multiple ones actually. And the commonality is inflammation and oxidative stress. And we're looking at things like cardiovascular health, metabolic health, liver health, joint health, longevity, and even mental health as it relates to Alzheimer's and other central nervous system diseases as we age. I'm going to show you some of the human and animal studies that have been here. We'll go through it a little bit quickly, but suffice it to say that there is extensive scientific evidence here. We know that in cardiovascular health studies, astaxanthin localizes in the heart and has been shown to significantly reduce triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, and blood pressure in human clinical trials, which are critical to maintaining cardiovascular health. And when we say significantly, I'm talking about the mathematical, statistical significance that is used in the scientific community, where you need to have at least a 95% probability that the results you're showing are real. So I'm not going to go through all of these here, but just to give you some idea in total to look at that we have extensive data. But in summary, in the cardiovascular health area, we know that astaxanthin reduces inflammation, improves lipid profiles, lowers blood pressure, and decreases artery plaque formation in animals. In metabolic health is diabetes and related areas. It reduces inflammation and increases something called adiponectin. Adiponectin is a protein hormone that's produced by fat cells and reduces inflammation and atherogenesis, which is the formation of fatty deposits in the arteries and enhancement of the response of cells to insulin. Lowers blood glucose and insulin levels in animals, and in other animal studies, it improved insulin signaling and response as well. Liver health, similar types of benefits. It decreases liver fat, what we call steatosis, reduces inflammation and oxidative stress, decreases liver enzyme levels in animals, and improves fibrosis and insulin response in animals as well. Joint health, that's another very big problem as we age. I'm sure none of you have that issue, but I know I do. Reduces inflammation, lowers oxidative stress, decreases joint degeneration in animal models, and reduces inflammatory markers in animals as well. And astaxanthin and longevity is a very intriguing new result. As Virginia mentioned earlier, Dr. Brad Wilcox here at the University of Hawaii and Cardex have been working on astaxanthin's ability to perhaps affect longevity. And this relates to activation of a very important, probably the most important anti-aging gene called FOXO3, which promotes longevity in humans. This was a gene discovered in humans and here in Hawaii through the Honolulu Heart Study at Kuakini, where they tested and have followed more than 8,000 Japanese American men since the 60s. They have records of every doctor visit, and they have records of medication, if they've passed away, what the issue was. And they have over 400,000 tissue samples. That's a repository of data and information available nowhere else in the world. And what they discovered out of this was that there is an anti-aging gene called FOXO3. And everyone has FOXO3, but most people do not have the most activated version of it. If you have the most activated version of it, you're more than 3 times likely to live to 100 healthy than those who don't. That particular finding has been replicated in over 20 studies, and it's not just Japanese American men, it's Caucasians, it's females, it's blacks, it's Europeans, it's Asians, etc., etc. So it's a human-wide anti-aging gene. Perhaps not surprisingly, it is a powerful cardiovascular protective. It confers that benefit. And also not surprisingly, it reduces inflammation as well. We were sitting, Dr. Wilcox and I were sitting on a friend's porch up in St. Louis Heights having a beer or 10 one night, and we thought, I wonder what astaxanthin would do, if anything, with this. And we said, well, we should look at this. And so we started to look at the literature, and we found that there was a study done in earthworms. C. elegans sounds much more elegant than a worm does, but so that's the name of the worm. And it turned out that we found a study showing a 30% increase in longevity with astaxanthin in the worm. But here's what's really interesting. They also did something where they knocked out the worm's version of FOXO3, because this is something that not just humans have, but all other species have too. They have a version of FOXO3. And when they knocked out mean, took out the FOXO3 gene from the worm, there was no benefit in extension of life. So we knew that the extension of life that was conferred by astaxanthin was related to the FOXO3 gene. So the next step was, well, let's test this. No one's ever tested it in mammals before. And so we tested this compound, astaxanthin, to see whether or not we could activate the FOXO3 gene in mice, in mammals, for the first time. And we did it here at the University of Hawaii. And it turned out we got a 90% activation of FOXO3 with astaxanthin, one of our proprietary astaxanthin compounds here. And so this is Brad's quote here. He says, through this research, we have shown that astaxanthin activates the FOXO3 gene, which promotes longevity. And it was a big news. I don't know if you remember it, but it was on the 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock news. It was KITV news here. I'm going to play a video for you here, as well as the Star advertising.
Extending human life. That possibilities next on KITV Island News at 6.
As scientists at UH Medical School say they're closer than ever before to developing an anti-aging supplement.
I think the concept that there is anything that we can do to improve human lifespan and health span is a breakthrough.
The scientific recipe to living longer could be within reach. This morning, the University of Hawaii John A. Burns School of Medicine announced it is closer than ever to understanding how human life can be extended. Moani Kealanabaro reports from Kaka'ako.
Scientists at UH believe they've cracked the code as to why some live longer than others. Tests on worms and mice inside this UH medical lab unveiled anti-aging benefits of a gene called FOXO3. Everyone has the gene, but research shows people that live well into their 90s have a certain form of it.
It's equivalent to not smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for 25 years. It's that powerful.
Scientists say they've discovered how to stimulate the life-giving form of the gene.
What we've shown is that we have a compound that actually activates FOXO3. So we've connected some dots that didn't exist before.
That compound is astaxanthin. It's an ingredient already found in supplements on store shelves. The latest research supports its critical role in health. Scientists are now looking for funding for clinical trials. That's where they say they'll continue research on how to alleviate inflammation in the body that could be connected to heart disease and even cancer.
All of these diseases seem to be tied into the building of this chronic inflammation. So if you can find a way to reduce the chronic inflammation, to combat that, then you can sort of tackle all of these age-related diseases at the same time.
Scientists say if testing goes well, we could be about 5 years away from seeing a newly formulated supplement. Moani Kealanabaro, KITV Island News.
Great, so we were delighted to see that as well. And so the product that you saw in that video there is something called Xanthus In. And it's a product that we and our company have developed over the last few years of time, and it's now on the market, and people can buy it. And later on, if you have an interest, we'll show you how to we'll give you each a sample for that. It is a very highly absorbed form of astaxanthin, recommended by healthcare professionals. It has superior absorption compared to ordinary astaxanthin, superior purity and safety. And so we like to describe it as the kind of the first physician-friendly astaxanthin that's out there here. But I thought this would be interesting to show you the absorption versus the microalgal version of it, where the first, generation 1.0 came. Actually, one of my previous companies developed the technology that allowed the version 1.0, but this is version 2.0 now. And what we see is that we have the absorption, the amount of astaxanthin that actually gets in your bloodstream per milligram of dosage. And so what we see here is you can see at 6 hours how much more the blue bar, which is Xanthus In, versus the gray bar, which is the other astaxanthin products that are out there today. And so for each capsule, what that means is you get 3 times more astaxanthin into your bloodstream. Also, very importantly, the variation between the individual subjects here was much less. That means that you don't have to worry that maybe as much as the capsule that you're taking, you're going to get the benefit from that one capsule much more likely. The we make this compound through something called natural product synthesis. It contains Xanthus In made by this particular technique. It's very precise, it gives great purity, and it allows for a better price as well. We talked earlier about astaxanthin safety, and this is safety that has been done specifically with the astaxanthin in Xanthus In. But look at the number of studies that we've done: acute toxicity, subchronic toxicity, 1-year chronic toxicity and carcinogenicity, 2-year carcinogenicity, genotoxicity, mutagenicity, and teratogenicity as well. What's really interesting, too, as well, is to look at these doses. Huge doses: 8,000 milligrams per kilogram, 1,000 milligrams per kilogram, 2,000 milligrams per kilogram of weight. This would be equivalent to maybe this much for a human. So in these animals, and we saw no clinically meaningful issues with these very large doses. And also, this has a GRAS designation. That's generally recognized as safe from the FDA. No way that aspirin and ibuprofen and steroids can get a GRAS designation. They're simply not safe enough. But here's some new data that I'd like to share with you today that we're very excited about. This is what we call the CHASE clinical trial, the Cardiovascular Health Astaxanthin Supplement Evaluation. This is a trial that's being done here in Hawaii. We're using Xanthus In, the exact product that I just showed you. And it's a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, IRB approved. This is all the buzzwords about the rigor around which the trial is being conducted, in up to 120 subjects with cardiovascular risk factors and with elevated inflammation as measured by CRP. And we looked at a number of other endpoints important to cardiovascular disease in addition to CRP. Duration is 12 weeks of dosing, just 3 months of dosing. And we have these interim results from 40 of the 120 subjects. We looked at 6 important cardiovascular measurements, things like, as we know, total cholesterol, LDL, CRP, triglycerides, oxidized LDL, and blood pressure. And in a study of interim results, you typically do not expect to find statistical significant benefit with just 40 out of 120 patients. But of these 6, 4 of the 6 were statistically significant. A benefit, and the others showed a very strong trend as well. So what we saw was that CRP reduced around 20 to 30%, and these are patients, again, like the other studies, that are on standard of care. They're taking statins, blood pressure medication, blood thinning medication as well. So these benefits are over and above what's being offered by traditional medical practitioners today. So about a 30% reduction in CRP, LDL, highly statistically significant, 12% reduction versus a 5% increase in placebo. Total cholesterol also down significantly versus placebo. Triglycerides, nice decrease in triglycerides. Oxidized LDL, the baddest of the bad LDL, which you'll hear more about in the coming years. And even blood pressure, we saw a statistical significantly drop in blood pressure as well. So this is really a foundation for a significant outreach to physicians, where 2/3 of the dietary supplement decisions are actually catalyzed by physicians. We've presented Xanthus In to over 3,000 physicians and other healthcare professionals. We've had quality interactions at conferences, CMEs, and meetings, and they have a strong interest in safely addressing inflammatory health. And in fact, we often present to physicians, maybe a similar size audience at this, sometimes really early in the morning. My colleagues often do that on the mainland. And what we were able to see was that these physicians actually stand in line to get samples afterwards. Randy Mao, who I'll introduce you to later, headed Pfizer's sales efforts here in Hawaii for years. And he said he didn't see that even for Viagra. So a little bit about us before we do a couple, hopefully, fun things here. We are a public company, a small public company here in Hawaii. Our symbol is CDXI. We were founded in 2006. We're focused on these carotenoids, astaxanthin and its relative zeaxanthin. We've invested over $40 million in this program. That seems like a lot of money, but in the drug development business, it's not even close. Often takes hundreds of millions of dollars or more to get a drug all the way approved. But we do have a dietary supplement, which is partway there. My background, in addition to what Virginia told you about, being co-founder and co-inventor of our products, I'm a former biotech analyst and money manager on Wall Street. George Bickerstaff, our chairman, is the former chief financial officer of Novartis. Terry Kelly, a top anti-inflammatory research executive at Boehringer Ingelheim. Michelle Galen, communications executive with Novartis. Makaran Jawa-Decker was a former research executive with Pfizer. But I have to tell you a quick story about Mac. Mac, we call him Mac for short. No one knows how to pronounce his name, and I'm sure I'm butchering it as well. But I was presenting at a conference in New York City for an investment conference. And after I finished, this Indian fellow comes up to me and says, "Are you the Watamull from Honolulu?" You know, it's like, okay, it's amazing he can even pronounce my name, and let alone know that I was from Honolulu at all, because we hadn't talked about that in the presentation. And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "Did your family give scholarships to Indian students to go to the United States to study?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a Watamull scholar." Isn't that a great story? And so he's ended up being a very strong part of our whole equation here as well. So serendipity is alive and well somehow. Deepak Bhatt is the head of interventional cardiology at Harvard, and one of the big anti-inflammatory trials, which I didn't have time today to describe, he was the global chairman of that as well. He's the head of our scientific advisory board and has been helping us design the clinical trial that I told you about earlier, the CHASE clinical trial. Dr. Gil Rishton worked at Amgen, the biggest biotech company in the world, led their small molecule chemistry program there. And Paresh Soni headed a company called the development of their drugs at a company called Amarin. Amarin is, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, it's a biotech company. Stock went from a couple bucks to $25 recently with the results of their research, looking at, they have a fish oil product that works similar to what we're doing. Fish oil drugs, as you know, anybody who's taking them, you have to take, they're huge horse pills, and you have to take multiple times per day. So there's some issues with that, and ours, our product may have a similar benefit, but without those issues. And with that, I would like to call up Randy Mao to come, and he's going to show you something that what we do with our particular capsule. We're going to put it into the water, and we're going to show you why it has 3 times better absorption than the microalgal product as well. It's as you can see, it's a very tiny capsule. And yeah, you can barely see it. Yeah, so yeah, it is vegan, gluten-free. So we put it in here, and we do this, and we shake it up, and you can see how quickly this turns and actually gets dispersed in the water. And in your stomach environment, this is why we have such better absorption. If you did it with the competitor product, which I won't name, this will not happen. It's oily and will float on the surface as well. So thank you, Randy. Appreciate that very much. I will tell you a couple things. Oh, she wants to pour. You can have it. So a couple things here. We are going to, if you'd like to get a sample, we have a form outside that you can fill out, and we'll give you a free sample of that to take home today if you have an interest. But also I'll mention too that if you have an interest in participating in our CHASE clinical trial, if you think you have cardiovascular risk factors or have had cardiovascular disease of some kind, you may be a candidate for it. We do give a small stipend, a couple $100, and free parking. Where the facility is in Kaneohe at the Premier Medical Group, where we have all of this clinical trial taking place, and so we have the opportunity. We have a table outside where you could sign up if you have an interest. With the Xanthus In as well, the bottle says 1 capsule, and it does work, 1 capsule for some people, but the sweet spot seems to be 2 to 4 for most people. And then there's people like me who take like 10 or 12 or 14. That's what I need. I'm not suggesting that you need to do that. You can find a much smaller dose, hopefully, than what I need. But I play tennis singles 3 times a week and be 70 in January, so I need all the help I can get on that. But with that, I'll say thank you and open any questions. I think we have a question period as well. Thank you.